On the evening of Tuesday, April 8th, the clock was ticking down. A deadline for Iran loomed. Issuing his demands on Monday, US President Donald Trump ordered Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz to shipping. Failure would result in the targeting of bridges and power plants.
They have till tomorrow. Now we'll see what happens. I can tell you they're negotiating, we think, in good faith. We're going to find out. We're getting the help of some incredible countries that want this to be ended because it affects them also. A lot of people are affected by this, but we're giving them till tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern time, and after that, they're going to have no bridges, they're going to have no power plants. Stone Ages, yeah, Stone Ages.
There will be nothing like it, he wrote on social media, with plenty of exclamation marks. On the day of the deadline, he upped the ante, claiming that, quote, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. Gulf nations, like Qatar, who for the past month have been on the sharp end of Iranian missiles, urged restraint and a resolution. A spokesman for Qatar's foreign ministry spoke to reporters on April 7th.
We were trying to defuse the escalation in the region since 2023. We have been warning since 2023 that escalation left unchecked will get us into a situation where it cannot be controlled. And we are very close to that point. And this is why we have been urging all parties to find a resolution out of this, to find a way of ending this war before it spirals out of control.
As the clock continued to count down, US Vice President J.D. Vance, speaking at an event in Hungary, tried to strike a more diplomatic tone than his boss.
The president has set a deadline for about 12 hours from now in the United States. We're going to find out, but there's going to be a lot of negotiation between now and then, and I'm hopeful that it gets to a good resolution.
The deadline got closer. 6 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours. With just 90 minutes to go, it was announced that a ceasefire deal had been struck. Mediated by Pakistan, a 2-week ceasefire was announced, during which time further negotiations will take place and details are set to be finalised. Writing on social media with a lot of caps lock, President Trump claimed that the US, quote, have already met and exceeded all military objectives. On Iranian state TV, the news anchor, reading a statement from the Iranian Supreme National Security Council, was equally defiant in victory. To the honourable, great and heroic nation of Iran, the enemy has suffered an undeniable, historic and crushing defeat in its cowardly, illegal and criminal war against the Iranian nation. Both Iran and the US claimed victory. But in Lebanon, there were no celebrations. The ceasefire agreed between the US and Iran, despite earlier announcements to the contrary, seemed to only include those two countries. The war between Israel and Hezbollah, which reignited on March 2nd after a 15-month ceasefire, continues. As many countries in the region stepped away from the brink, Lebanon was thrust further into the fire. On Wednesday, April 8th, Israel claimed to have hit 100 targets in Lebanon in just 10 minutes. At least 254 were killed on Wednesday alone. This week, what does Israel want in Lebanon? Can Hezbollah be disarmed? And what can the Lebanese government do to bring peace and stability to its lands? My name is Hugo Goodridge, and you're listening to The New Arab Voice. The US and Israel launched their war against Iran on February 28th. Iran responded with its own missiles and drones, targeting Israel, Gulf states, and US assets in the region. On March 2nd, the Lebanese group Hezbollah jumped into the fray. Allied to Iran, Hezbollah started by launching an array of rockets and drones from southern Lebanon at an Israeli missile defense site south of the city of Haifa. In statements that followed, Hezbollah described the attack as a, quote, legitimate defensive response. Israel responded. Airstrikes struck the capital Beirut and the towns and villages across the south of the country and the Bekaa Valley. What followed over the next month was tragically familiar. As Hezbollah launched rockets and drones across the border into Israel, they responded with airstrikes. In the south of Lebanon, Israeli troops invaded, and over the weeks, gun battles between Israeli invaders and small groups of Hezbollah fighters persisted. This latest war follows on from the war between Israel and Hezbollah in 2024. For Hezbollah, that was a highly costly fight. Not only were many from the group's leadership killed, including the longtime Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, but also the group's military sites and rocket and missile launchers were severely degraded. Technically, that war ended in a ceasefire between the two sides. But in reality, Israel never stopped attacking the group. Even with the ceasefire, Hezbollah's military sites and its leadership were continuously targeted by Israel. With the start of the recent conflict between the two sides, attacks have ramped up. But given the battering that Hezbollah took last time, how has the group changed?
Well, the main change is that Hezbollah in this war has been unable to reach deeper into northern Israel or central Israel in the way that it might have been able until 2024, when it lost much of its missile arsenal.
This is Yazid Sayer, Senior Fellow at the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut.
And so most of its rocket attacks now and drone attacks, which I think is important to remember, are focused on the northern part of Israel, the border communities and targets, military targets and others in that sort of border area, alongside with very small unit fighting in southern Lebanon, where Israeli ground forces have crossed the border.
The war of 2024 was hard for Hezbollah and costly. Today, they typically can't fire projectiles as far as they once could. And after the war of 2024, it would have been anticipated that Hezbollah would have struggled to mount a persistent resistance to Israel. And yet, Israel continues to face fierce opposition.
And that's more, I think, than most Israelis were expecting Hezbollah to be able to do at all after the major defeat in 2024, but also given the current rate of fire by Israeli forces in Lebanon, it does seem surprising that Hezbollah has been able to maintain this level of rocket and drone attacks.
According to reports, Hezbollah has reverted to something called the Mughniya doctrine, after Imad Mughniya, a key co-founder of the group that was killed by the CIA and Mossad in 2008. In effect, this is a greater reliance on smaller, more mobile units, launching surprise attacks and deploying guerrilla-style tactics. These are the same tactics used by the group in their 2006 war with Israel.
Israel claimed back in 2024 to have destroyed something like 80% of Hezbollah's missile arsenal. But that was estimated at something like 150,000 rockets and missiles of different types. And if we assume there's 20% of that left, then you're talking about 30,000 various kinds of rockets and missiles. Hezbollah could keep up a rate of 200 strikes a day or rockets a day quite easily then for a pretty long time.
The revised tactics, combined with continued rocket and drone attacks, have made Hezbollah, despite the setbacks of 2024, a costly thorn in the side of the invading Israeli army. But however successful Hezbollah is performing on the battlefield in Lebanon, they will never be in any sort of position to launch a ground assault against Israel. It's questionable if they could even push Israel's invading army back from Lebanon's borders. So what do they want? What are their objectives?
Hezbollah's first goal is to emerge from this war intact, or at least to survive this war with enough capability and credibility as a fighting force to be able to prevent either Israel imposing terms on Lebanon, which would involve complete disarmament of Hezbollah, but also to be able to confront any Lebanese parties pushing for Hezbollah's disarmament or even marginalization in domestic Lebanese politics. So I think that's probably, in a way, Hezbollah's primary goal, even if the reason it entered the war was in support of Iran.
Hezbollah is, as Iran was, facing similar situations. They can't win by destroying Israel or the US. They win if they can survive. And for Hezbollah, if they can survive, then it will also serve as firm evidence for their necessity as a military force in Lebanon.
I think there's a sense of preempting what may follow, which is increased Lebanese demands from the rest of the communities, from the government, for its disarmament.
If Hezbollah's objective is to survive, what about Israel? What do they want from this war? To start with, Iran.
What Israel wants is for the Iranian regime to fall, for sure. That's definitely what they would like to happen. They would like there to be a different regime in place, a government that is very pro-Israel. That is what they would fantasize about.
This is Meirav Zonshine, senior analyst on Israel for the International Crisis Group and a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times.
But I think what they very quickly, and specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu very quickly understood, is that decapitating the leadership and bombing them profusely is not enough to make the regime fall. So he has been talking about, which is much of what the Netanyahu doctrine looks like everywhere in the Middle East where Israel strikes, which is degrading capabilities and basically trying to push back the military capabilities of the adversary. So in this case, he's talked about dismantling or destroying or severely damaging the nuclear capabilities of Iran, the ballistic missile capabilities, and he has talked about creating the conditions for regime change, which is just a fudgy way to say we're not actually going to achieve regime change, so we're going to try to create the conditions.
Iran has certainly lost a lot of its military assets during this war, namely missile launchers and stockpiles. During the last 4 weeks of the conflict, we have seen US and Israeli planes effectively operate with complete freedom in Iranian skies. There was the F-15 fighter jet that was shot down on April 3rd, and there were a couple of other incidents where Iran did manage to inflict damage, but these efforts are far outweighed by the hundreds of attacks that the US and Israel have launched against Iran without facing any real danger. We are still in the very early days of the ceasefire agreement, and over the next 2 weeks, more will be revealed. But currently, the suggestions are that Netanyahu would have preferred to have continued with the war. Israel's objectives are similar when it comes to Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Since the November 2024 ceasefire, Israel has unilaterally basically been operating in the skies of Lebanon, taking out weapons depots, taking out leaders, basically a one-sided ceasefire where Israel fires to degrade capabilities, to prevent the buildup. But then in recent months, and specifically, I guess, after the June 2025 12-day war, they noticed a pattern of some kind of rehabilitation. So there was talk about a potential operation in Lebanon, a re-energizing of some kind of ground operation in southern Lebanon. But what we had instead was the launch of the war in Iran, and then Hezbollah joined. So now what Israel is doing is again, degrading capabilities.
Degrading capabilities isn't nothing for Israel. They are certainly happy to degrade, but ultimately they would want something more permanent.
In this case, I think realistically, while they would love and would like and want to disarm Hezbollah, what realistically they're able to do right now, especially when they're overstretched in Iran and elsewhere, is to degrade the capabilities as much as possible. And what they have been doing is creating a deeper buffer zone in South Lebanon. So since 2024, they took up about 5 different points along the border between Israel and Lebanon, and they've kept those areas clear of Lebanese citizens, and now they're deepening that buffer zone further. with the argument that they are able to protect Israelis in northern Israel from anti-tank missile fire, which is anywhere between, I guess, like 5 and 8 kilometers worth of land in terms of how far those missiles can go. That doesn't protect, obviously, from farther ranged rockets, but that is what they're trying to do to provide a certain sense of security for the residents who live very close to the border.
The war against Iran has been marked by confusing aims on the part of the US and Israel, saying they want one thing, then changing their minds, then saying that they had already actually achieved the first objective, but also saying that the job needs completing. The same has been true with Israel in Lebanon.
In the last few days, there's been kind of a back and forth in the media here, also being framed as the IDF saying, look, we're not going to be able to disarm Hezbollah by force. It's just not something that's going to happen. And the defense minister and some of the political echelons saying, no, that is the goal. So I think in some ways, in the similar way that the goals in the war in Iran have kind of been moderated a bit from regime change to something a little less than that here as well. It's kind of a reality check that it's not like Israel can just bomb Hezbollah for a few weeks and suddenly it's going to disarm.
Yazid Sayar again.
Israel is seeking to do something it cannot achieve through its own force of arms without occupying the whole of Lebanon and sort of changing Lebanese demographics and politics in the manner, let's say, that the United States did in Iraq after its invasion in 2003, where it re-engineered the entire political system. Israel, I don't think, is going to invest in Lebanon in that way.
Israel cannot disarm Hezbollah from the sky, no more than the US and Israel could implement regime change in Iran from the sky. They do have an ally of sorts in the struggle to disarm Hezbollah, the Lebanese government. Following the war of 2024, the Lebanese government put in a plan to disarm the group. See previous episodes of the New Arab Voice podcast. But when Hezbollah launched its rockets on March 2nd, once again ensuring that Lebanese lands and homes would be bombed by Israel, the government, led by President Joseph Aoun and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, took more drastic steps. Speaking at a press conference on March 2nd, the Prime Minister said,
تعلن دولة لبنانية رفضها المطلق.
The Lebanese state declares its absolute rejection, leaving no room for any ambiguity or interpretation of any military or security actions launched from the Lebanese territory outside the framework of its legitimate institutions. It affirms that the decision of war and peace is exclusively in its hands, which necessitates the immediate prohibition of all Hezbollah's security and military activity as being outside the law, and obliging it to hand over its weapons to the Lebanese state.
وإلزامه بتسليم سلاحه إلى الدولة اللبنانية.
The move to outlaw Hezbollah's armed wing was highly significant, although the question of implementation hangs heavy over the decision. Both Israel and Lebanon want Hezbollah disarmed. The Lebanese state are happy for the group to continue its political efforts, but not its military efforts. Israel would probably like to see political efforts end, but details, they can agree on at least one thing. Does this mean that the Lebanese government and Israel can negotiate between themselves to put an end to Hezbollah's military wing and also the endless Israeli airstrikes?
Well, we know that the Lebanese government offered direct talks with Israel in order to reach permanent security arrangements. And this is what President Joseph Aoun, in fact, proposed. I haven't been following too carefully because I don't think this effort is going to lead anywhere. The Israelis do not appear to have responded or either at all or with any seriousness. The US-led truce committee that was supposed to oversee and implement the ceasefire agreed in November 2024 is, of course, a channel of communication that exists. The US administration itself relays messages, but it's not clear to me that the Israelis are in any way committed to this process, because right now they don't want the war to stop, either because they haven't achieved the goals they really want and are therefore simply trying to prolong the conflict.
The Israeli government does not want to talk. In fact, with the current far-right makeup of the government, they would prefer to undo some of the work that has taken place in the past.
Not only that, there's been no meaningful outcome of any talks, if any have actually taken place. We've got the Israeli, I think it was Defense Minister, threatening to cancel the maritime agreement demarcating maritime borders between Israel and Lebanon of 2022. So if anything, we see a regression there. I just don't think that this is what's going to be part of ending the war. Israel may come away at the end saying, okay, we're going to extract permanent security arrangements, but I think this is not something that the Lebanese government can offer in a way that is credible enough for the Israelis to accept, nor does it meet what the Israelis really want to do in Lebanon and in the wider region.
Israel won't talk to the Lebanese government about Hezbollah.
And what's very frustrating, I think, for people who work towards diplomacy and end of war is that there is an offer on the table, no matter how, feeble it might be, by the Lebanese government to enter diplomatic negotiations with Israel over what to do. And Israel has simply not responded in any way to those.
Might the Lebanese government be able to talk to Hezbollah directly?
I would argue that the Lebanese government doesn't have what you might call leverage over Hezbollah, since the threat of the use of force through the Lebanese army. So it's not a threat that the Lebanese government wants to deploy, because the Lebanese government, and I think rightly, sees that any talk of the use of force simply increases the risks of civil strife, if not civil war, within Lebanon.
The disagreements between Hezbollah and the government are fundamental. The government says disarm. Hezbollah says no. Israeli actions prove why they must be armed, while the government argues that Israeli actions are in response to Hezbollah being armed. In all likelihood, to create the conditions for Hezbollah to disarm, Israel would have to end its military action, at least in Lebanon. But Israel is unlikely to stop while Hezbollah is armed, and if the Lebanese state sought to use force to disarm the group, the risk of a civil war and a return to the appalling sectarian violence seen throughout the 70s and 80s is a real fear.
There's also a big fear, certainly in the Lebanese Army Command and on the part of its commander-in-chief, the Rudolf Heikel, that if the Lebanese army is ordered into direct action against Hezbollah, it may suffer splits and defections within its ranks. And this is something that has happened in a major way twice in the past, certainly in the 1970s and again in the mid-1980s. So I don't think leverage is actually what Lebanese government can exert. It has nonetheless set new political benchmarks or milestones in banning Hezbollah's military action and demanding that it surrender its weapons. So this, I think, starts to set a new stage for future political talks. And this is probably why Hezbollah has actually downgraded its official channels with the Lebanese government. Its interlocutor, its official representative who engaged with Lebanese government agencies in the past, has now stepped down from that role, as I understand, or been moved to something else. And basically Hezbollah is saying, we're not talking. I don't think that there's any direct process.
It has been argued that the Lebanese army should meaningfully and purposefully deploy in the area between the Litani River in the south of the country and the border with Israel. This is an area that has traditionally been occupied and used by Hezbollah forces.
So as to assert the control of the Lebanese government in that area and therefore block the deployment of Hezbollah there. And in that sense, there's a certain indirect leverage, if you like, that the Lebanese government could exercise, which doesn't involve direct confrontation with Hezbollah, but that nonetheless deploys the Lebanese army in ways that both demonstrate the Lebanese government's seriousness to Israel, to the United States, to outside parties, but also demonstrates these intentions domestically.
This is a possibility. As much as the Lebanese army is highly reticent to engage with force against Hezbollah, so too Hezbollah would also likely be unwilling to engage directly in force against the Lebanese army, particularly since this would require them rediverting military assets away from its fight with Israel. It's a possible solution, although it's not without risk. Fundamentally, something needs to happen, because the cycle of violence that is inflicted upon Lebanon and the Lebanese people cannot continue.
This war, the massive dislocation of something like 1 million people, maybe more, the Israeli military is speaking of 1.6 million displaced. The economic costs, the impact on economic production are immeasurable. Now, the problem the Lebanese government really faces, the worst problem, is it's pretty much bankrupt and its financial means are extremely limited. And so dealing with the refugee problem over a longer period of time is going to make it very hard for Lebanese government to cope, let alone thinking about getting them back to homes that have been demolished systematically by the Israeli army in South Lebanon, or to, the big chunks of the southern suburbs that have now been brought to the ground as well. So the whole task of reconstruction, let alone of reactivating the economy, that is something that Lebanon simply does not have the funds for. And the really worrying thing here is that it's very likely that Arab states, which might in the past have helped out, although for the last number of years there's been less and less willingness in the Arab Gulf in particular to support the Lebanese government in the wake of wars with Israel. Nonetheless, even had they been willing to do so, all the Arab Gulf countries now are going to have a massive economic cost to bear, whether of repairing damage or the loss of facilities such as the Qatari gas field, which is going to take, in some sections, 3 to 5 years to bring back to service. So the Gulf states, in all fairness, are in a position where for the first time, they've got their own massive war bill, and that's without firing a shot. So it's not clear who exactly is going to help Lebanon. Europe is unlikely to, not only because it's helping Ukraine in the war with Russia, but also because the entire world is suffering the economic fallout and the financial fallout of this current ongoing war in the Gulf.
Within Lebanon, there is plenty of anger at Hezbollah. They see Hezbollah as dragging the country into a war they didn't ask for and can ill afford. There is also a fair constituency that still supports Hezbollah, and that support often increases when they take the fight to Israel. What about in Israel? Netanyahu has been leading the country from one war to another since the October 7th attacks. Are they not tired?
The public opinion in Israel, despite not being happy with Netanyahu, is very much in favor of this war. There's even, I think, greater percentage in polls of support for the war in Lebanon than the war in Iran. And the war in Iran has a lot of popularity, but it's been waning as the weeks go by.
A poll conducted by Tel Aviv University's Institute for National Security Studies showed that 9 in 10 Israeli Jews support the war, with just over half, 54%, supporting the idea that Israel should go further and, quote, continue until the overthrow of the Ayatollah. Polls like this are not gospel truth and shouldn't be taken as such, but they can give a flavour of a feeling. And the feeling is positive. As the war has progressed, another idea has arisen. It's not a new idea, but it's one that is worth keeping an eye on.
But in terms of kind of the greater Israel annexation of Lebanon, I mean, the army claims that it's strictly a security buffer zone and that it has no other plans. There's, of course, there are, a minority of extremists who have and continue to try to go into Lebanon and kind of, settle in certain places. This is something that's very, very fringe and very, very marginal. But it's important to remember that when Israel, I mean, it's a completely different scenario, but when Israel took over the West Bank and Gaza in 1967, it was also considered for security reasons, and we're still there. So these things have a tendency of getting prolonged, especially, the areas in the immediate border with southern Lebanon. I don't see Israel withdrawing anytime soon if there's no movement on Hezbollah disarmament. But the politicians like Bezalel Smotrich, who is a settler and the finance minister, and who's basically the de facto governor of the West Bank, he has made these statements about taking parts of Lebanon and annexing them. I think it's bluster. I don't think there's any plan to do that. But I think that the longer that you stay in a protracted conflict and you keep troops on the ground, the longer the idea of staying there becomes normalized. And so that's the fear, I think.
An annexation of southern Lebanon would be extreme and is currently only being promoted by extremists. The idea of annexing the West Bank or Gaza is far more mainstream in Israeli politics and is not something that they have currently achieved.
What we are probably going to see is the Israeli military probing on the fringes of South Lebanon, going in and out of some locations, holding on to a few right along the border. It's certainly got the ground forces massing near the border so as to be ready to cross over, but the Israeli ground forces are themselves exhausted and tired. We may find instead that Israel doesn't physically occupy the rest of South Lebanon, but maintains a heavy role of drones, remote observation from hilltops, and artillery strikes and drone strikes and the occasional airstrike to maintain a sort of free fire zone. This won't be all that easy since a lot of Lebanese civilians have refused to leave, and this may also, in months to come, become something that Israel pays a diplomatic price for, in Europe at least, if nowhere else. Again, this whole South Lebanon thing, I think that the more dramatic statements by the Israelis again might not be what we end up seeing on the ground.
As we said, we are in the opening days of this ceasefire. There are a number of ways it can still collapse. Iran has said that ships traversing the Strait of Hormuz will still require the permission of Tehran. Iran has also said that attacks in Lebanon must stop. President Trump may feel slighted by Iranian comments and return to war. It could all yet change. But the war will end. One way or another. All wars do. When that happens, Israel will be living in a region which it dragged into a war which saw many countries who did not ask for a war being bombed.
Clearly, this war has exposed both the dangers of being aligned with the US and Israel, because I think in the beginning of the war and still, some of the Gulf countries are getting a lot more of the fire than Israel is, and they're a lot more, their proximity, they're much closer to Iran. They have a lot of assets, but whether it's energy assets or American bases, Kuwait has been hit very hard because of American assets there. And so they've suffered a great deal. But so on the one hand, they're obviously very upset. And I think they don't rely on Trump or Israel as reliable, credible kind of, negotiators in any kind of end game right now. So that's disappointing for them. At the same time, they understand Iran's power. And, Netanyahu, in some ways, was very smart about it when he understood that, he could get Trump to launch this war with him together. He probably understood that much of the brunt was going to be borne by the Gulf countries and not necessarily by Israel. Not to say that Israel isn't, suffering, and despite the fact that the casualty count is quite low. I mean, Israel is basically paralyzed for the last month. Kids are not in school. People don't sleep. I mean, there's a lot. It's a war of attrition. But the Gulf countries really are the ones losing a lot more, I think, from this war. And so maybe Netanyahu took that into account when he expanded the boundaries of this war. So in some ways, that was a smart move. Whether or not that will actually, like he claims, bring new alliances after this war, whether Gulf countries will say, oh, wow, Iran really is the bad guy, and it's really great that we sided with the US and Israel, has yet to be seen. And I'm very, very doubtful of that.
Obviously, not all Gulf countries are alike. The relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia is very different to that of their relationship with the UAE, who signed up to the Abraham Accords.
The Gulf countries are in a very complicated and difficult position. And obviously, there's also differences between Oman and Qatar and the UAE and Saudi. They have different, there's nuances in their positions. But I think the real test will be what happens once this war is over, or at least, subsides to some extent, and then to see where the Israel relationship with the Gulf stands. And I'm not sure that, what Netanyahu is selling is what they're going to be buying.
And it's not just Israel's relationship with Gulf nations that will need attention. There is a strong belief in the US that they were dragged into this war by Israel. The war didn't exactly go to plan, and now Americans are paying more for their everyday goods. It's not unfair for them to ask, what did we get out of all of this?
Public opinion in America was waning before this war because of what's considered the genocide in Gaza. And so, for the first time, young Americans, I think, identify more with Palestinians and with Israel. I mean, these polls obviously are a bit problematic, and you can support, Palestinian lives and not be anti-Israel. I mean, all that is of course true. But the point is, American public opinion has already shifted on the Israel issue over the last few years anyway. But now with this, it's shifted even more. And that's going to have certain repercussions, I think, in the future. But if you ask me about the U.S.-Israel relationship today, I mean, even when we take into account people like Tucker Carlson, even when we take into account that there's elements in Trump's base, in the MAGA base, who don't want to go to wars in the Middle East, who don't, subscribe to Israel's kind of use of force, I still think that the American foreign policy on Israel, certainly within the Republican Party, but to an extent in the Democratic Party, we're still not going to see a sudden break with Israel. I still think that's a ways away. Again, things are rapidly changing on a grassroots level. Things are changing in the Democratic Party. So this current war is accelerating that for sure. But whether you're actually going to see like a top-down change, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen anytime in the next, months or years.
This episode of The New Arab Voice was written and produced by me, Hugo Goodrich. Our theme music was by Omar Al-Fil. The New Arab Voice will be back with a new episode shortly. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified when a new episode drops. You can find the link in the show notes. Until then, you can find all our previous episodes on all major podcast platforms. You can also check out our social media accounts on Instagram and X, both at TNA Podcasts, for additional content. And you can email us, podcast@newarab.com. That's podcast@newarab.com. You can subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and you can also rate and review, which helps us spread the word. Don't forget to follow The New Arab on Facebook, X, and Instagram for all the latest news, analysis, and opinion from the region.